Hello to everyone joining us tonight. My name is Chantel Henwood and my pronouns are they, them. And I'll be your host tonight, and welcome to Invisible, an event that's part of SEXtember. SEXtember is an event created by the health promotions team at UNSW designed to encourage you to question, explore, and learn about the intricacies of our intimate lives and the challenges, triumphs, and experiences of people from many different intersections of the UNSW community and beyond. For many of us, the intimate parts of ourselves, from our sexuality, our body, our race, religion, or ability, have been an integral part in forming the ways we connect with ourselves, each other, and move through the world. For some, these intimate parts of ourselves can prevent us from existing in our natural state, accessing the help we need, and make us feel at conflict with ourselves and others. At times, we feel invisible and left out of some of the most vital conversations that impact us directly. And tonight, this event aims to discuss these experiences with our panelists. However, we could not discuss this without first acknowledging that SEXtember was first created on stolen land, and tonight we are all signing in from various places that have been the birthplace of culture, knowledge, and storytelling for millennia. So tonight, I acknowledge that UNSW campuses reside on unceded Bedegal, Gadigal, and Noongar peoples who are the traditional owners of the lands where each of the UNSW campuses are situated. I am coming to you from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I encourage you to share in the chat where you are joining us from so that we can all partake in this acknowledgement. We show our respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of the land that we reside. We show our respect to the Indigenous guests who may be joining us tonight, their elders past, present, and emerging, for the care of these lands over countless generations, for their continued leadership and contribution to the tens of thousands of years of knowledge that continues to nourish our communities, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, always was, and always will be. Before we get started for tonight, and introduce my panel, I'd like to give thanks to our SEXtember sponsors that made this event possible. We're really grateful to have Glide Global as a silver sponsor supporting SEXtember and tonight's event. Glide are manufacturers and distributors of quality, vegan-friendly sexual health products, including condoms, lube, latex gloves, dams, and they also manufacture the Femidom, a condom alternative for people with vulvas. If you follow the link in the chat, you can also have your chance at winning a free 3-month Glide Global subscription. And of course, I'd like to thank the UNSW and the health promotions team who have been working hard to bring this festival to life. This year is the first year that the festival is held completely online, but it's also the first time it's open to the public. This past couple of years, our health has been focused on COVID-19, and while we still need to remain vigilant in protecting ourselves and the community, I'm really grateful that we get to take a moment to acknowledge other important parts of our lives, like mental health, sexual health, relationships, and coming together as a community. Tonight's panel will be discussing a range of topics that for some might be challenging. So I ask everyone to be gentle with yourself during and after tonight's event. Should you need to speak to anyone at any point, there are services available for UNSW students and the general public that you can access, and we've placed the links in the chat should you need them. Closed captions are enabled for our discussion tonight, and we encourage you all to submit your own questions for the panel via our chat or Q&A function. So tonight, we are joined by 6 impressive and insightful panelists who are here to share their own experiences, thoughts, and feelings about some of the challenges that their communities face when it comes to visibility, body autonomy, and intimacy. Our first panelist, Rainbow, is an international award-winning Canberra-based burlesque artist, teacher, and producer. She regularly breaks down limiting barriers of ageism, sexism, and conventional beauty standards by being a visible member of the burlesque community and identifies as a loving daughter, sister, aunt, and friend. Rainbow is also a UNSW graduate, completing a Bachelor of Arts and moving on to complete an impressive list of qualifications, including a graduate diploma in translating, a Master of Arts in Intelligence Analysis, and is currently completing a Bachelor of Clinical Exercise Physiology and a graduate diploma in cybersecurity. Our next guest, Dominic, has spent the last 17 years as an Aboriginal health educator with a focus on sexual health. He's a firm believer in community-led initiatives. Dominic has been involved in several programs, including Wish You Were Queer and Aboriginal Standpoint. Dominic is also a poet, writer, and podcaster whose work has been featured in Melbourne's Writing Festival and published by Indigenous X. Describing themselves as a Jewish academic and butch Leatherdyke, which is my favorite description of the night. Shoshana Rosenberg has published works on the topics of transsexual health, queer, self-discovery, and the intersections between sound, queerness, and liberation, and recently published a book through Cambridge University Press called Queer Entanglements, which dives into the relationship between queerness and human connections. A current student at UNSW completing their Bachelor of International Studies, Aman Mohammed identifies as a Muslim person of colour and is currently representing UNSW as the mooting director for the Mull's Environmental Law Moot. Aman is also a national debating semi-finalist and is part of ECHO, a non-for-profit organisation that works to promote financial and economic literacy to high school children, especially those from rural areas. Joel Murray is a public health, social policy, and evaluation specialist who currently lives in the Inner West with their two cats, Mr. T and Chibi T, currently in the process of completing their Master of Public Health here at UNSW. And they have worked on a range of settings, including government, performing arts, and community health sectors, and are currently working as a community health programs manager. Our final panelist is Tilly Lawless, a queer Sydney-based sex worker and recently published author who uses her Instagram to speak about her personal experience within the sex industry. She describes herself as a country girl, and her debut novel, Nothing But My Body, was published in 2020 and is available to purchase through most bookstores, including Darlinghurst and Glebe Books at Glebe. So I want to thank all my panelists for being here tonight. And we're going to kick things off with our first question. In what ways do you feel invisible because of who you are or what you do or how people perceive you? And I'll just get things started and start with Tilly.
Yeah, so this was an interesting question to me because I feel like both a mix of like hyper visible and completely invisible in some ways. So I've always, not so much anymore because I feel like people recognize me now and know that I'm gay, but all through my teens and early 20s, I very much felt invisible as like a femme gay woman. So I, would be refused entry to gay clubs. Like I could be standing next to my girlfriend at something and people would still ask like, oh, so you both here with your boyfriends? So I felt, completely overlooked in that. But then like on the other side of the coin, I feel so hyper conscious of being a sex worker, especially in spaces where my life crosses over with legal reality. So like when I traveled to the US, and it's illegal for anyone who's done prostitution in the last 10 years to enter the US, like I was so scared of being deported because I'm face out as a sex worker. And when I've worked in places illegally, like when I've worked overseas or like when I've even worked illegally in hotels in Melbourne or whatever, like I'm in a space of feeling hyper visible because of the sexual acts that I do. So, and it's also been an interesting thing for me as well because the invisibility I used to feel as like a femme gay woman was like predicated on the fact that invisibility only exists kind of with anonymity. And as I've got more well-known now, everyone I meet knows that I'm gay, so I don't experience that invisibleness anymore, which is like really a kind of like interesting space to exist in because I still know that if I was a femme woman that people didn't know, they would still assume I was straight. I just don't have to deal with confronting people's prejudices anymore around aesthetics and sexuality. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a really, I guess, fluid experience for you.
Yeah. I definitely have moved from feeling invisible to feeling hyper visible. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Joel, what about you?
I think for me, yeah, there's a few intersecting identities that I hold or experience that could be interpreted as invisible. So first of all, living with HIV and with modern medication, it's like HIV is not something that I worry about every day. And, it's very much invisible. Like people don't know I've got HIV. Although at the same time, I've done a lot of public advocacy, so a lot of people actually know that I've got HIV in some ways. But then I also think about my non-binary experience, and I get read as male most of the time in public, particularly like in service industries, misters and sirs. So that can make me feel really invisible. And sometimes, sometimes I want to correct people, and other times I'm just like, oh, just let it go through to the keeper. Yeah, because it's like I could get really like frustrated every single time it happens, or I could just like sort of just be at peace and be really comfortable in like knowing who I am, and it's more important that I know who I am than other people know who I am. Yeah, so
Yeah.
those are my first few thoughts.
Yeah. I really understand that kind of depending on who's engaging with you is your level of visibility, and that there's ways in which you kind of choose to be visible, but are also kind of rendered invisible, maybe not by choice, or other people kind of take that option away from you. Rainbow, you are very visible within a certain community and work really hard to be prominent within that. What are some of the ways in which generally outside of that community that invisibility kind of creeps in within your experience?
Oh, in real life, because I think of burlesque as my fantasy life, but in real life,
living a double life, are you?
Pretty much, yeah. Like it feels like two different personas, but I feel usually I feel invisible in real life, if that makes sense. I found as I got older and as I got larger, and continued to get larger, generally I'm not seen or not heard, and I'm also compounding that a low talker, which means that people don't hear me usually, and especially when I get nervous, I get even quieter. So burlesque is the opposite. I actually get to vent all my frustration and wear garish things, and just be really like, I get all my anger and frustration out while entertaining people, and sometimes it actually feels like the most intimate connection that I actually have is with the audience, rather than in real life where I'm playing a role, I guess. Yeah, sometimes, a lot of the time. But yeah.
So would you say that you're more yourself when you're on that stage, connecting with the people who maybe you don't know personally?
I am. I think I'm more confident, and I'm more, I feel more comfortable to say or to express what I'm feeling or what I think. And I feel that I express it, weirdly enough, better through dance than I do verbally. So I feel, yeah, it's a very different persona. So I don't second guess myself usually, and I'll just get out there, have a good time. Doesn't matter if I make a mistake. I'll just go, oh, well, that was good. We had a good time. We had a bit of a laugh. People seemed happy, and that was the goal. Whereas in real life, oh my God, like I will spend hours working on an email, make sure I haven't actually offended anyone, and things like that. So if I could actually be more like my burlesque self, I think I'd be happier. Like in real life. But yes, so quite often I feel invisible. And part of that is because the way that I am in real life with people I don't know so well, I tend to try and make myself invisible. Whereas burlesque is that outlet where I get to be me and feel comfortable. And it doesn't seem to matter if people like it or not. Thankfully they like it, which is handy, but yeah.
I have seen you perform and can confirm it is incredible to see. It's invisibility would not even come into the mind of something that you choose to do after seeing you perform. So it's really interesting that you kind of feel like you have to act in different ways depending on what setting that you're in. Aman, you're young, coming into university, experiencing lots of new things and kind of finding your way. What's it like as a student and going through a self-discovery process and thinking about the ways in which your identity you might have to leave parts of yourself behind depending on what situation you're in?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think what Rainbow was saying, actually, I resonated with that a little bit, in the sense that I think the first way I think I'm sometimes feeling invisible is by, like my lack of experience with all of these things, in the sense that obviously if you come from a background of like immigrant families, for instance, you just don't get to have a lot of the experiences that a lot of like more Western sort of families do, and so on and so forth. And I think it's a circular problem in the sense that in the same way Rainbow felt that she had to self-censor the way that she behaved with a lot of people, I feel like I do too, in the sense that a lot of people might have the confidence to go out and like ask someone out or just start talking to someone just out of the blue. But I feel like by virtue of my inaction, I'm invisible because I'm just taught to not sort of pursue those sorts of things or not try and instigate those conversations. And then it creates a circular issue. So I think that circularity of under-experience lends itself to feelings of invisibility. I also think I feel invisible by way of, I think to a large extent, thinking of myself as rather undesirable. I mean, when I was very young, even now actually, I used to write like somewhat depressing poetry about like aesthetics and so on and so forth. And I remember looking at images of people online who were like fairer skinned, who had different color hair and eyes and everything, and literally take rulers and like measure out my facial proportions in regards to them. And oddly enough, like I thought I was a bit manic for doing that, but strangely enough, that was an experience that quite a few of my other people of color friends have also gone through, which I think was quite interesting. Recently, I was watching a show called Young Royals, and some of the characters were people of color, and they were portrayed as icons of beauty. And I think I didn't realize how important representation was in terms of feeling desirable then, but I did at that point in time. But it made me realize how undesirable it felt and how, like as a result, consequently invisible I felt there as well. The last thing in terms of like, I guess coming into like knowing myself and so on and so forth, I think that's been an interesting journey, but even then that's been rendered invisible sometimes in the sense that when I've interacted with some people, like I've been told, oh, I've never been with an Indian boy or whatever. And I haven't even spoken to them and I'm not even Indian. And I just feel like even when I am seen, like that fetishization and objectification really just like makes it difficult for me to know who I am and what I'm meant to act like when other people, perhaps with more experience, who are older than me, whom I don't even really know, try and write over me, which is awful. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm so sorry you've had that experience. Is it something that you have spoken about with other people of color? You mentioned that you didn't realize that those experiences were also shared with other people. Like, have you kind of found visibility in sharing that with other people?
Yeah, definitely. I think visibility in a couple of ways. The first is by noticing the beauty of my friends who are people of color. That also consequently made me feel a little bit more visible in the sense that if I could do that to someone else, then surely that could be paid back. But secondly, yeah, through those conversations, we've kind of like self-discovered different people who are kind of like killing it. So maybe like celebrities who just speak their mind and are very articulate and intelligent and say lots of useful things and do lots of useful advocacy. And through finding those people who look a bit different, but say things that are just as valuable, if not even more valuable, I think that's been quite useful at feeling visible in the sense that if someone else can represent me and be visible, then so can I.
Yeah, I love that. Dominic, what's been your experience through both personally and your work? You do a lot of work out in the community and in terms of, you know, sexual health and well-being and things like that. What's been, I guess, that shared experience with the people that you work with and how it might also impact you?
I wrote down some stuff about how
I love being prepared.
Yes, this is the writer in me. Of where I feel invisible, but every time I kept looking at the list, what actually was why I felt invisible was actually because of erasure. And it wasn't so much about myself, but rather like basically the time I feel most invisible is, you know, when Aboriginality or Aboriginal culture is erased for the benefit of the colony. And with that comes our subcultures, comes our sub-identities. I also feel like there's like a homogenizing, like I feel like I feel invisible as a queer person because there are these kind of stereotypes of like hetero adjacent gayness. And if you don't fit into that, then, you know, like often in sexual health, I will be teaching and I'll use the word queer. And the reaction that I get is like, you know, like, you know, you can't use that word. And I'm like, well, actually, I identify as that word. And having to unpack what that means. And so it's a tricky one. I think also, I feel most invisible in the queer community. As a queer Aboriginal person, I feel my Aboriginality is invisible. My Aboriginal history is invisible. I feel like it happens when there are police in pride marches. I also feel it in health promotion. I've worked in Aboriginal for 17 years, and a lot of the health promotion, if it's not created by Aboriginal people, it's white gay men in underwear with, you know, abs. And it's just really like not reflective of the queer people I hang out with or the queer and gay community that I exist in. And I just think, okay, so this isn't about messaging. This is actually about making a certain group of people feel good or making the messaging just for them. And so, yeah, in queer health and sexual health, as a client or a patient of health services, I feel invisible because I don't see myself reflected on the walls. Yeah, that's some spaces for me. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. I think there seems to be a lot of common themes for people coming up that sometimes they feel invisible most within their own community. And that can be really difficult. I think it's difficult conversations to have about the invisibility that people feel within, especially the queer community, which a lot of us belong to. Shoshana, you do a lot of research and writing about queerness and transness and identity and connection. How much of your research kind of comes from personal experience, and what are some things that you've kind of discovered?
I mean, so as I mentioned in the introduction that we were doing just before we started the webinar, I'm a professional transsexual. So in a lot of ways, every aspect of my research is affected by my lived experience. And I think that that's probably where I guess my kind of feelings around this topic maybe reflect more kind of what especially Tilly was kind of talking about, was that actually I feel quite hyper visible. You know, I'm 6'4". I'm very, very, very obviously something that is gender and sexuality incomprehensible to people. And so to me, it's like, to me, it's like it's a weird part of me is always kind of like trying to find that sort of invisibility and not really managing, actually. You know, I would say that ironically, the way in which I'm most invisible is actually within the field of transgender research. It is a field that is overrun with cisgender people. It is a field where cisgender people get all the money, they get all the publications, they get, completely sort of prioritized and valued in a different way. You know, it's kind of like, I'm always a community member in those kind of spaces. I'm always just there because I'm trans, not because I'm a highly qualified, person with lots of both lived experience knowledge and also like research kind of knowledge. And it's funny, it really is one of the few realms where I would feel any sense of invisibility again, because like in terms of the day-to-day and also in terms of even like when you think about government policies and stuff, it's like I'm a person who is heavily legislated against. I'm a person who is, kind of on the receiving end of violence in both like interpersonal and kind of structural sort of ways. Like, I would say there are days where I would almost value some invisibility on some sort of like twisted kind of level.
Yeah, no, I understand that a lot, and especially bringing up that kind of like legislative side of things. A lot of people here on the panel tonight are kind of experiencing the full effects of what legislation can do, and the fact that you need to be visible in order to be legislated against, but the legislation kind of renders you, I guess, socially invisible in that you're unable to move through the world and access the things that you need. Tilly, there's been a lot of changes recently in terms of the laws against sex work and things like that. How has that impacted your work, and also just generally how you feel moving within your community, having
Do you mean the laws in regards to the pandemic locking it down, or do you mean the change to decrim in Victoria? Which laws are you referring?
decrim?
Oh, so I mean, I'm in New South Wales, so we've had decrim since 1995, actually the first place in the world to get decriminalisation of sex work. So I have been always really lucky, and that's where I've largely worked. I mean, I have worked illegally in other states. I'm obviously so fucking happy for Victorian sex workers who are going to get decrim soon. And Northern Territory actually got decrim a year or two back, which is incredible because, like, obviously in Northern Territory, like, anti-sex work laws were generally used against Aboriginal women. So great that Northern Territory got decrim. But yeah, my life personally hasn't been affected by those shifts because I already was lucky to be in a state with decriminalisation. But obviously, like, I am grateful for that every day, like, especially, speaking to friends of mine who work in countries where it's completely illegal, like US or UK. Or, I mean, I should also recognise, though, that, like, I am lucky that I live a life where people's judgment doesn't affect me too much. Like, I do have, for example, friends who work in New South Wales where there's decriminalisation but have lost children in custody battles, for example, because obviously stigma still operates even if there's a great policy model, like, stigma can still do things like alongside that. I personally haven't. I've worked on under basically the best system you can have in regards to sex work. So I've been really, really lucky. Yeah.
Have you heard of any stories or experiences of people who maybe haven't worked under the best circumstances for them, and like how?
Of course, I've had friends. I've had friends. As I said, I've had friends one of my friends lost access to her daughter because of her sex work. I have friends who've been deported from countries, a number of friends who've been deported from the US. It's really, really awful. But I feel like I don't want to, like, kind of mine other people's stories. Do you know what I mean? To, like, like to speak about. But if people do want to know about like how policy affects sex work generally, there's a really good book called Revolting Prostitutes, written by 2 UK sex workers, which talks about laws in relation to sex work globally and how that affects sex workers' lives. And yeah, I mean, something that I feel like is important to note with sex work legislation is that a lot of places, it's very tied to colonization. Like a lot of places didn't even have sex work laws till Western countries came and colonized them. So India, for example, didn't have anti-sex work laws till Britain came, and a lot of African countries now still have anti-sex work laws because of rules that the US insert. So, for example, the US won't give medical aid to African countries unless they have anti-sex work legislation written into place. So, like the kind of like global imperialism and stuff we see is like very much tied to the way sex workers' bodies are policed. Yeah, but yeah, no, I'm incredibly lucky. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, of course, not into mining other people's stories, but thank you for sharing what you did.
Oh, that's so good.
I mean, you know, like someone like myself, you know, when I was living in Victoria, I couldn't do sex work legally because I was living with HIV, and, you know, decriminalisation will address that, which is great because I know so many, well, I don't know so many, but I know a handful of sex workers living with HIV in Melbourne, you know, who weren't able to connect to community orgs, who weren't able to, you know, they ran very invisible lives because they didn't want their sex work and their HIV status to be known at the same time because they were, you know, could jeopardize their living. Yeah.
Totally. Which is ridiculous, especially when you consider like, well, all the sex workers I know who've worked HIV positive have been undetectable, which is just absurd then to criminalize them. Yeah. It's like you're safer sleeping with someone who's undetectable than someone who like doesn't know their status. Like it's wild.
Exactly.
Yeah. This really brings in the ideas of stigma, which, like Tilly, you were talking about before. There's a lot of stigma kind of encompassing a lot of different intersections, from, you know, transness to HIV positive sex work, like larger bodies, disabled bodies, all sorts of things like that. Joel, do you want to speak a little bit on the ways in which stigma impacts yourself or people living with HIV, and some of the ways in which I guess it's improved over time, and what has happened to kind of make that impact?
Yeah. Look, I think there are sort of like two things that can impact upon stigma, both like sort of moral, you know, sort of moral views or kind of cultural or social views. Sorry, I've just lost my train of thought in the middle of what I was saying. What was the cookie? We were talking about stigma, okay. Right? Yes, sorry.
Stigma,
and then there's other things like structural barriers, systems, and laws, criminalisation. So stigma is about the attitudes and beliefs, whereas discrimination is kind of like enacting upon that stigma in a way that discriminates against a person. I think for people experiencing stigma and discrimination, it's not so much any one single episode, but more the multitude of many small episodes that can add up, you know, and that's being treated differently because of the color of your skin or your HIV status, or the fact that you inject drugs, or your sexuality or gender, or whatever, you know, the case is. You know, I think there's some interesting research that the Centre for Social Research in Health does. And, you know, they were talking to the general population, and they were trying to ascertain the levels of stigmatizing attitudes towards people who inject drugs, people with HIV, and sex workers. And sex workers came out to be the most stigmatized. And which is interesting because, like what I said before about like criminalization, well, we've got decriminalization, but there's still like this massive social stigma around sex work, which then can make it really difficult for people to talk about their lives and what they're doing, which then, you know, can act as a barrier to health. Or it can be, conversely, it can be, or like the opposite could be, you know, like a doctor sees that I'm a person who's injected drugs, and that's the first thing they ask me when I go and see them. And it's like, well, actually, I'm here today to talk about my chest infection. But thanks, you know, or, you know, it's like, and Joel, so how's the injecting drug use? So, yeah, so sometimes I would rather be invisible in those circumstances. And so I can understand why people might, you know, choose different doctors or different, you know, might see different people for different health needs or decide not to engage in health at all. Yeah, anyway, that's
so interesting what you're saying about choosing to be invisible, because I think about that a lot with like the blood ban on, like, you know, it's still illegal for both sex workers and gay men to donate blood, which is like, I find hugely ironic because they're two demographics that are probably most likely to know their HIV status. And it just
seems recently
like
overturned in the UK as well. So it's slowly moving.
In the UK, but it's not overturned here, is it though? Is it?
No.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, recently.
Yeah, there's still window periods. I think it's 6 months or something now.
Yeah, they extended it, like now
but
you still have to be celibate for 6 months. Like it's ridiculous. Like, and yeah, I was thinking about do you always just get called Shoshana, or do you get called a shortened name?
I go by Shosh, if you feel like it.
I was gonna boldly call you that, and then I was like, I should check.
Please go for it.
Use that. But yeah, like what you were saying before about, you know, like being so visible as like a trans, well, like a obviously queer person, you know, like no one looking at you would like think anything other than the fact that you were queer and like you're tall and like whatever. And like I find this, like, the idea of visibility is like such an interesting thing, because I'm just speaking as I'm thinking about all this stuff we're talking about. It almost runs parallel to like this obsession that I feel like the gay rights movement had for a while with coming out, you know, and then there was kind of a reaction to it, and it was like, well, if you don't want to come out, that's okay, and if you don't want to live loud and proud, that's also okay. And like I wonder if we're going to have the same thing with, like, because as you get more and more visible, that's not necessarily always a good thing, you know. You want to be visible to a degree because you want to be included in discussions around health, like, you know, like I found it irritating when gay men have been focused on more and given more funding than gay women in health things, like, but you also don't want to be super visible. Like,
I mean, it's really interesting that you mentioned that. My first paper that I ever published was actually totally challenging this whole like obsession with coming out, and I was actually I wrote a paper on the concept of coming in, and actually thinking about that really what's important is thinking about you and your relationship to yourself and your relationship to your sexuality and what that means. And coming out might be an aspect of that process, but it's something that is not, it's not a tick box for like valuable, valid, healthy relationship with your queerness, essentially. Like that's exactly the thing. You know, we know that definitely in the 80s and especially in the 90s, there were a lot of like political outings of people, especially like celebrities and politicians and stuff that were like forcibly outed. And that comes from such a specific position that I can't particularly relate to, because again, I walk into a room and I'm out. It doesn't matter it actually almost doesn't even matter what I'm wearing or anything like that. I walk into a room, I'm out. And I reap both rewards and often punishments of existing in that sort of way.
It's also sorry, I was riffing off what you were saying about like a lot of trans health stuff is run by cis people, and it's like also like we need visibility, but it also needs to come from us, because, you know, people could argue, oh, you know, there's a focus on trans health now, and it's like, well, if it's a focus on trans health that's only funding cis people to deal with trans health, is that really the kind of visibility we're seeking, you know? And I feel like that's probably similar to what, you know, Dominic would say maybe in regards to like Aboriginal health. Like, you know, if it's funding white people to work with Aboriginal health, that's like probably not the, like, I don't know, I'm just guessing here. Is that?
No, you're right. I used to work at the family planning here in South Australia for 6 years, and it was predominantly ran by white nurses. And I really struggled to get like Aboriginal queerness and sexual health, you know, as a focus in their work, the focus of my work, because that's the training that I delivered. But they always thought, you know, they would brush it off to us, the Aboriginal team or the Aboriginal workers, to deal with it. So I left that workplace and I came and worked where I'm sitting right now, which is the Aboriginal Health Council. And I just took it to them, and I've taken it to the executive, the board, the staff here, and just said, you all need to be doing more, because it's always us as Aboriginal queer people, and I would say the same for trans and same for sex workers and other cultural groups, that we are the ones going in to the hospitals when our peers are having mental breakdowns or having suicidal ideations or suicide attempts. We're the ones, and we're not trained. And I was to do that, but yet we are trained in a way as peers. We, through experience, we are trained. But I was just fed up. I was fed up with being the person called into the hospital when we have Aboriginal liaison workers, we have Aboriginal mental health services that are community controlled. And so instead of asking the white health services to step up, I asked my own community to do that. And we recently, AXA has kind of, has heard my call or demands. And we've just recently obtained the rainbow tick. And apparently we're the first Aboriginal org in the country to get that. Even though I think that it's actually continuation of work. Like, I just feel like I'm just continuing the work of other Aboriginal people, Aboriginal queer people. But yeah, you have to, like, you really have to turn into your own to make shit happen, to make, to feel visible. You have to go knock on the door sometimes. And that's what we did. So
that's a really amazing achievement.
And we're now, sorry, the other thing is we're now going to run that training. I developed an Aboriginal LGBT training for all the health workers, all the workers here. And we're now going to hopefully run that in every Aboriginal community controlled health org in the state. So,
that's great.
I mean, but that training's been going on for about 11 years, but not at the point, like, it's just been health workers who have signed up for it. Now it's going to be all the art shows are kind of wanting to agreeing that all their staff, from, you know, admin, clinical workers, mental health, board members, and executive will participate in that training. So, but we've got to get some money to pay someone to run it. So
that's the next step. Anyone here with rich parents?
We only need 200,000.
You mentioned as well that previously when you kind of like worked within Indigenous healthcare, that it was run by all white nurses. And I think there's often when people are called out on that kind of idea, they're like, you know, we just don't know where to find them. We don't know if they exist and all that sort of stuff. And what was it like having to go to your community and be like, we need you to step up? And also, how do you feel about this idea that, you know, there's a lot of people that have previously been excluded from opportunities to step up and be a part of research and healthcare and all that sort of stuff because of, you know, structural barriers that have prevented them from getting the education or access or financial ability to do those things. Have you seen that changed in the last few years?
You know, I'm known as a troublemaker. I really am. Like, and people, because I just say things as they are. Like, I think once I turned 30, I just had enough and got really frustrated at how things move so slowly. You know, I used to have some of those white nurses wouldn't speak, talk about being invisible. That when I called them out on their white privilege one time, they didn't speak to me for like 3 days.
Wow.
But I was like, oh, I'm glad. So,
Talk about
but then I
fragility.
think like even in the Aboriginal community, I have used the cultural responsibilities that we have of caring for each other to pull on that and say, you need to be doing more as an Aboriginal person or as a non-Aboriginal person working in Aboriginal health. You need to be doing more. So I'm lucky to have that because, you know, that doesn't exist it might exist in other cultural groups. I don't think it exists in the queer community like that, you know, you can pull on that. There is the camaraderie, but I don't think that it's the same as like cultural ties. So, but yeah, I do think there is a change. I do think that there's young people. I see young Aboriginal queer people wanting, you know, the jobs that I'm in. And that's why I'm stepping out at the end of the year, because I want to see them step into this job role and be the new blood and take it forward. So, plus I'm tired.
I was about to say,
does.
you must be tired after. I don't know how you've been doing this for 17 years. You actually don't look old enough. I was like trying to work out your age by mine.
It's this ring light that I have. Thank you. I started young. I was 20 years of age when I started
Okay.
on a clean needle program, a needle and syringe program in the Parklands. So that's, you know, I cut my teeth sharp very early. So
that's the secret. It's starting young.
Yeah. Exactly.
Also, a lot of you work kind of like in activist space or are moving into that kind of space. What are some of the challenges that people have noticed, or how have they coped with kind of the pressures of like being visible for your community and your people that you want to represent, so that you can bring in that new blood and you can inspire the next generation? How are you dealing and managing with that pressure and the tiredness that comes with it? And do you have any advice for people who want to be more visible for their community while also maintaining their own health and well-being and also safety?
Yeah, I mean, it is really tiring work, and particularly, you know, like when I was working for organizations that were all about living with HIV, like a little bit unlike working for like a queer and trans org, I felt like working in HIV, like it was a lot more personal, and I felt a lot, I mean, I still do feel the responsibility of the community in the work I do, but maybe it's also, you know, I've been able to grow and mature and heal myself as well. So maybe that's part of it. I think as well, like it's about like providing those opportunities. So like as a person who has now been around for a little, you know, for a few years in this space, you know, it's about making sure that, you know, if like an opportunity like this, for example, you know, I might offer it to a colleague instead. So it's like being able to take that step back and be confident that the younger people have got it, and that they know, and sometimes they know better. You know, they've got different experiences than I did. Like I grew up in a regional town where the most multicultural people I think were maybe Italian and Greek, and so, you know, comparing to, you know, my experience at uni now, where I've got all of these diverse people from all these countries around the world and across Australia as well, from all these different walks of life coming together to learn something together, is something, really beautiful about that.
And Rainbow, you work as a teacher and a performer, so you're kind of, training up, I guess, the next generation of people that are going to be vulnerable with an audience and inspire people to get involved. What is that like, kind of working with people and giving parts of yourself to, inspire others?
Oh, I really love teaching. In fact, I think sometimes I prefer it more to performing, because you still perform, but in a different way. But I really love it because when I'm teaching, I love trying to help or trying to teach people to love dance, I guess, and then to find the joy in themselves when they realize that they also can dance. So I tend to I tend to work with I laugh because I'm such a lazy dancer. That's how I describe myself. I always go for the easy way out, if all else fails, just smile and hopefully they don't see what your feet are doing. But I like to encourage people to dance, because I think when I was growing up, it was always seen that, it's only if you're going to be a serious dancer and you're going to be in the Australian Ballet that you can dance. And it's such a terrible way, and to just rip that joy from people, because dance is for everyone. So when I'm teaching, I'm really just trying to inspire them to get that joy. And it doesn't matter if they want to perform on stage or not. It's more about just bringing that joy to their life, because I didn't dance for a long period from uni. Since leaving high school, and I didn't really get into it until my mid-30s again. And then I realized, why did I let that go? It's such an enjoyable thing. I absolutely love it. And it beats the hell out of going to the gym for me, because I'm not a gym person. But yeah, and I want to inspire that in other people, like just doing things for fun, because we don't, particularly as we get older, we tend to stop doing the things that give us joy and make us laugh, and just for fun. We focus on all the responsibilities for other people, and we forget that we need to give a little bit back to ourselves, or just be silly sometimes too. I don't know.
100%. Aman.
Oh yes, sorry. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you to both Rainbow and Joel for building communities, because I think Dominic, your community with your community is really inspiring, and the fact that you're able to have cultural bonds and relying on that is exceptionally cool, because it is true that when everyone else lets you down, you are unfortunately forced to stand up, go above and beyond what anyone necessarily should have to, in order to just guarantee your basic rights. And I think that those sense of cultural ties are really excellent. But I guess from someone from my background, not even just as a second generation immigrant, wherein there are different conflicting values, but also just someone who comes from a really conservative sort of background, being queer and everything means that I just can't really rely upon my culture and community. So when you have to figure out different communities for yourselves, the people that then make those communities and give you those spaces, I think just become all that more important. Which is to say, thank you both, of course, but I think I'm particularly grateful for those sorts of communities and spaces. Actually, I was thinking a lot about, in preparing for this, how people from my sort of background would even be able to access spaces and to learn about sex and have open discussions about all of that. And I figured out that the only real space that I actually had to talk about those things was a Model United Nations conference, when they had a sex talk, and they were like, here are a box of condoms if you want to do stuff, but please exercise caution. And that's because and that's because obviously my parents and I would never have that conversation. I had to pretend in year 11 that I didn't know what a pedophile was, because it was just so censored at home. And even things going to youth conventions and everything, wherein those safe spaces were open, wherein people had conversations, that was never allowed, just because of cultural differences and resistance to those sorts of values. So these communities that are formed, that create spaces for young people like me to learn about things, to speak up about things, I think are incredibly valuable. So thank you. And thank you everyone here actually for literally facilitating that tonight.
Thank you for sharing. That's
Can I just
so
say something
great.
Can I just say something about activism? That's about community. Yeah, it's like family. You can make your own. And I was just talking about how I could kind of exploit the cultural responsibilities within the Aboriginal community to get what I wanted. But totally, make your own community. With activism, I just, like, as someone who has been involved in protest and Aboriginal activism and queer activism, like, I feel like that when I was talking a little bit more about the the hetero-adjacent gayness, which might offend some people, but hey, like, I feel like marriage equality really took a lot of air out of the queer activist space. And it was kind of, I really didn't give a fuck about marriage equality, but I knew it was important for other people. So I got behind it. And I feel like we need to see a little bit more teeth gritting and a lot more support thrown behind the other movements that affect queer people. So, more support for sex workers, more support for trans people, the list goes on and on. And that intersectioning stuff with queerness. Also, I'm sick of kind of seeing in the activist space always not, it's like money. Everything has to revolve around money. And I think that the best activism it may have money involved, but it's not centered around how much money you can raise, how much money you can pull together. Sometimes the best activism is getting in the street and shutting shit down and actually being, the disruption that needs to take place. Like the Pride March here in Adelaide is disgusting. It's basically we had Coles one year and they had trolleys and they were spinning trolleys around in the Pride, and I just
different
think,
to Mardi Gras, really.
Yeah, I've never.
I was going to say, Dominic, Adelaide is one of the better Pride marches I've been to.
God.
You should see the Perth one, Angel. You should see the Perth one. It's something.
But we need to stop looking to corporate validation. Like I just, I remember like when like Doritos brought out rainbow chips and everyone was like, "Isn't this great?" And I was like, "No, it's not." Like, how is this going to help trans people access healthcare? Like, this is not relevant. This is not important. We're being sidetracked. So I want to see like more local, more community driven shit. It doesn't need to always be at a national or international level. We can focus locally, and we actually get more wins on the board when we focus locally. And in that, I want to give a shout out to Pride of the South here in Adelaide, who have done incredible stuff locally in the southern suburbs of Adelaide, around building up they've got their own Pride March. It's all centered around the community down there. And they've even started a youth drop-in as well, which I know they're a dime a dozen these days, and that's brilliant. But to have that down in the southern suburbs of Adelaide, I never thought I would see what I'm seeing. So yeah, they're a testament to that local spirit.
I agree so much with you. I just want to add on some of the points you were saying. I think the thing about money and activism is a really important point to make. And I saw someone speaking online the other day about, and I can't remember who it was, so I'm just going to take their idea and run with it. But it was really amazing, whoever it was. They were speaking about when it's a really troubling thing when people begin to make a lucrative financial career off activism, because once people are making a lot of money off activism, they're not invested in actually changing the system, because they are profiting from the fact that the system is bad and they can keep generating outrage around it. So I think of someone like Clementine Ford, for example, who makes a fuckload of money off her Patreon and all the things she does, and it's all about calling men out and stuff. And you're like, at the point she started, maybe it was wonderful, right? But at the point now where she is just profiting such a fucking huge amount personally off that, and it's like, how much change is she making versus how much financial capital is she making from it? Or something like the Red Scare podcast or things like that. I think it becomes, I personally I'm always really conflicted about when I make money off anything I see as activism, because on one side I'm like, yeah, I believe that people should be paid for their labor, but on the other side it's like, once you make that your brand and your career, it's a really problematic thing. And I also so agree with you about the corporate stuff. And I actually learned something recently that you guys might all know, I don't know, but I learned this recently, it blew my mind, which was that so the whole concept of pride, like that rewinds back to like the 60s and 70s. And there was actually like a discussion with like Sylvia Rivera and like other people like that about whether they would go with gay pride or gay power, right? And they ended up going with gay pride because they thought it was less threatening to straight people, you know, because that could be about personally being okay with yourself rather than collective power. And I think that's where, to be honest, a lot of the movement went wrong because we became focused on individuals rather than getting the best rights for the collective, which is, as you said, why people can focus on certain rights things and forget about other rights issues. You know, we all need to get behind each other. So I think gay pride is like such an amazing, easy concept for corporations to jump behind because it isn't threatening. You know, what if we were about gay power and corporation, and I'm using gay here to be like a synonym for like queer and all other stuff. Do you know what I mean? I'm just using the old word, but you know, corporations wouldn't be so easily able to get behind gay power because that would be things like get gay asylum seekers out of detention. You know, it would be getting equal access to IVF for queer couples. You know, things like that. That corporations is not as good for their brand. So I think we really need to shift. I personally hate the word pride and I've always hated the concept. I find it really American. But yeah, anyway, so that was such a rant, but all the things you were saying were making me think of that stuff.
No, they're great points, Tilly. Like, you know, rainbow capitalism, as I like to call it, is a real issue in so many different spaces. And it really, I think pride really does symbolize kind of inaction, because pride can be done in any way by anyone. The same with visibility, like what is visibility and what are the ways in which people are visible? What are they going to do with their visibility? Joel, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think I wanted to talk about like allyship, and like I feel like a lot of like the mainstream or capital G gay community has forgotten the role of allyship of other people in the community who wrapped around and like cared for them while they died and protested MPs' personal houses because people were too sick and dying to get on the streets and do it themselves. And that now we're not dying and it's like, oh, I've got marriage equality, trans rights, not my problem. And it's like, actually, you know what? You wouldn't have those rights if it wasn't for the allies. And now you need to turn around and do your ally bit.
Yeah, that also goes into like that sense of that focus on the individual as opposed to the community, and that if you identify as LGBTIQ+, that you are a part of a community and that you can be an ally to the other letters in the community. So this also kind of brings me to another question of what are the ways in which you do feel visible, as in like when was the last time you were really seen, and what was it that was done in order to make you feel like that anyone can go?
Maybe I'll start. And I was actually thinking about this because I'm a big sappy lesbian. And I actually really, that experience is really rare for me. And I would say that meeting my partner currently, Queenie, who's watching this 2 rooms away from here.
Hi, Queenie.
That was really like, that's been a really big like thing for me, because I think that again, it's like, you know, we talk about visibility, we talk about being seen. And I think that a lot of the time, even that gets kind of reduced. It gets reduced to like, oh, I see your transness, I see your queerness. You know, for me, it's like, I see your autism maybe, or like this and that and the other. But the experience of being like seen, understood in the way that all of those life factors like actually form who I am as a person, it's largely been in those more relational kind of ways. You know, again, I don't feel seen by a gay TM. I don't feel seen by like, oh, Dominic, did you say that Coles were doing trolley dances in the Pride? Anyway, you know, I don't, that's not how I feel seen. I don't feel seen by seeing 2 like white, like cis, like women like kiss each other on TV. Like it doesn't do anything for me. But that relational stuff, the like inner space, the like kind of interpersonal stuff, that's really where I've had my most kind of recent experience of actually feeling fully seen in everything that I am, in all the parts that I'm comprised of.
Oh my God, I actually get you so much on that. It's like an interpersonal thing, because I was going to, my story about being seen, because I know we were sent these like questions beforehand, and I like saw that question. I was like, oh, I feel like my experience of being seen recently is really trivial. But like now that I've heard you say that, I'm like, okay, it's actually perfect. But like I was watching this like show, this like kind of like, it's filmed in Jordan, in an all-girls school, and it's called Al Rawabi School for Girls, and it's kind of like Mean Girls, but in Arabic. Like it's so fucking trashy, but I'm obsessed with it. And I watched it with a friend of mine and this gay guy who I've been friends with for like fucking 10 years or whatever. And as I was watching it, like I was like, oh my God, this girl is like so hot. I'm just obsessed with this girl. Like I like can't stop thinking about her. Like I'm looking at her like Instagram all the time. And he was like, oh, you're talking about the redhead, aren't you? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, oh, she's so your type. You always go on about redheads. And I was like, I just felt so seen, because I was like, oh my God, you know me so well. And like, you're also sick of my shit. You're like, shut up about the redheads, Tilly. Like,
Amazing. That's totally it. That's totally the vibe for me, at least.
I was like, you know me, and you've had enough. That's great.
I love that. Rainbow, what about you?
Look, it was an odd experience today because, like everyone, my life's through Zoom now. But I didn't get much sleep last night. I actually was seen today, which was really unusual because obviously living on my own in my own little bubble, I'm not really getting out or seeing anyone like a lot of people, or in a position to be seen. But I was in a meeting at work, and in the meeting, I was extremely tired. And so I get even more unconfident, if you like. And so I was apologizing. I always apologize. It's really bad. I was apologizing for expressing an opinion, or, I'd say, look, I apologize before I'd say my opinion and things like that. And then a colleague of mine, who I don't know that well because I only just started this job just before we went into lockdown, he contacted me. He said, oh, look, can we have a chat? He goes, what's going on? And I thought, oh, I thought I was doing a great job of pretending, like, oh, everything's fine, everything's jovial, everything's okay. And he goes, that's not like you. Or, you just seem to apologize a lot. What's going on there? And so he was actually, I felt seen for the first time because someone was taking the time, I think, to say hello or, just have that chat. So it was really nice. Yeah. Of course, I burst into tears naturally, as you do. So professionally, whatever. But there's tomorrow. It'll be better. Yeah.
So that was really about someone kind of noticing something about you and taking the time to be like, I see you do that. Like, what is that about? So like that, I guess, desire to learn more.
Well, yeah, and it's lovely because I preparing for this, I did read and a few things, or write down a few notes, hoping that I'd be more articulate. But one of the things that I did mean to mention was that I found as I got older, like literally on the street, people would walk into me because they wouldn't see me. And because normally I'm not wearing makeup, like I made an effort today. I hope you appreciate it. But
great.
They don't. Thanks. You're going to be hard on the blusher.
We really do. You've done great. Look, I'm wearing nothing. My girlfriend did my eyebrows. That's all you got from me today.
Fabulous. You've got all this color. You look wonderful. But literally people would walk into me on the street, and it was purely because they just didn't even notice me. I was like, wow, I've become invisible that way. So when people do ask me a question properly or like actually see me, I'm like, oh goodness, that happened. That's nice.
It's interesting that being invisible can also be so invasive, as someone would bump into you and come into your personal space just because they weren't aware. That's I think we think of invisibility as like lonely and isolating, but it can also be quite invasive at times. Dominic, what about you?
I think I feel most visible when the Aboriginal Health workers refer to me as the sex man. So
Oh, that's hard.
yeah, because I've been teaching particularly about for about 11 years, been pushing the sexual health stuff. And one of my students turned around to me one day and asked me a question, and I was like, well, I don't know the answer to that. And they're like, well, you should know, you're the sex man. And then from there, that has stuck. So now from Ceduna, which is the far west coast, all the way to Mount Gambier down near the Victorian border, they all know me as the sex man. So, which is a fun title. But yeah, it's nice.
Does that make you feel? Yeah, does that make you feel somewhat like accomplished? I guess in that, like, that's your purpose. Like,
yes, exactly. Yeah. They've come to know me as the guy that always talks about sexual health. So yeah, the sex man. Although it does have like a creepy connotation, like, like it sounds like a horror movie character.
No, it's like Condom Man. It's like Condom Man. It's great.
Yeah, I'll take that on.
Yeah, love that. Aman, what about you? When was the last time you felt seen?
Yeah, so I think I agree with everyone else here in the sense that I feel seen in like little microcosms and pockets of my life as opposed to broadly. I was thinking about what Tilly was saying actually about corporations. And I think that corporations are so good, not just at like promoting a brand, but I think in particular when we're talking about collective rights, promoting a specific brand at the cost of others directly, like literally directly, right? In the sense that, for instance, when you have big films about queerness or whatever, it comes at the cost of more nuanced indie films that are better portrayals of different types of queer people, or even things like products and stuff like that. Like that gay TM, whatever. Not whatever, they're stupid and annoying. But I think it's really frustrating because those things are directly just places where people do not get seen, as Shoshana was saying before. I think in terms of like broad social stuff, I also, again, as a person of color, like feel kind of unseen in the sense that like the like trajectory of a person of color by way of like familial values and those sorts of things are just at times juxtaposed with like Western notions of how to live your life. So for instance, when people feel seen by like actualizing themselves and moving out and starting their own life and figuring out things and getting into relationships and like having people come over because you have that space, that is antithetical to like Eastern notions of like family and always staying with the cultural unit, right? Like even people overseas, it's very common for like grandparents and great-grandparents and like grandchildren to live together. So even those sorts of discrepancies mean that you feel unseen, or the like life expectations that are imposed upon you make you feel unseen in the sense that it's like, by age 25, you should have had these sets of experiences, but it's difficult to do that when, you have to balance it out with other people that you really care about and love and don't want to disappoint. So I think, in terms of feeling seen then, I think it is within the little microcosms. So for instance, Anna Ho has seen and read lots of my poetry and I think understands me quite well. And a bunch of other people have done that too. I would note though that when you feel a little bit trapped and when you feel like you can't access space in which to discuss things, it means that you look for understanding and, being seen in certain dangerous positions as well. Like I know a lot of people go to like online spaces and try and feel seen, but then, we all know that predators exist in those sorts of spaces and try and capitalize on like vulnerable people that are young there, right? When they're trying to share their story and it's kind of exploitative and sexual in a very, very weird way. Micro pockets of being seen, but that's not necessarily a good thing. One more thing I'd want to say though is I noted a lot of people said that sometimes it's best to not be invisible because of social judgment. I understand that, but I think I just want to say it's so sad because that should never be the way it is. Like you should just be able to, I think, just be recognized for who you are and not judged. And it's sad that we have to take the burden to make ourselves invisible and not be seen for our own sort of solace and calm, when really that's not our job and it's not our fault. And that's the burden that society needs to reconcile with. So I think even though it's good to live in little pockets, hopefully with all of your advocacy and stuff like this, we get broader changes so that we're able to be properly seen.
By the way, not to derail Aman, but someone is hitting on you in the Q&A section.
Yeah, I was about to bring
Have
that
you
up.
seen that? Okay. Maybe you haven't seen it.
Anonymous attendee, if you want to hit up those DMs, the Instagrams there. I'm going to combine two of our questions. So there's kind of questions about like, what is your happy place? And as people who kind of render themselves invisible or feel invisible, but often want to live quite loud, how is it that you find pride in visibility, where it's safe to do so? And how do you navigate that visibility and feeling like comfortable and proud within yourself, within the spaces that you navigate?
I mean, I've got this really bright red tracksuit that I'm wearing that is like a twin set, and that makes me feel really visible, but at the same time, it makes me feel really affirmed in my gender, because it feels neither. And yeah, it just makes me feel really confident because it's red and it's a bold color. And so it makes me forget about what other people care about, or at least it brings a smile to their face because they're like, well, that dude's like, you know, or whatever, that non-binary person is, yeah, they're raging, they're kicking that today and they look great.
You do look great in that red tracksuit.
I do love red, can I say?
Aman.
Yeah, I think that's a really tricky question. I don't have an answer, but my non-answer is going to be my answer, in the sense that I think it's quite difficult to know, like, when you're navigating spaces, whether or not you choose to restrict expressing certain aspects of yourself because you want other parts of yourself to be seen and recognized, or whether you're being coerced into just restricting that aspect of yourself because you're uncomfortable with expressing it. And I genuinely don't know, but I feel like when we talk about like gay pride and everything, I think that a lot of people do want to be seen as more than just that one code of their identity, right? Like that's obviously really important to be a versatile and different person. And so you restrict your like queer self sometimes to try and highlight those other aspects of yourself, your passions, your intelligence, your connections, your like relationships and whatever. But it's difficult to know if that's a choice or if that's just something that is put onto you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. Does anyone else have anything to add on that?
I feel like I don't feel, I mean, I already said I have an issue with the word pride, but I really don't think I feel pride about anything in my life. But that's not to say that I don't feel good about myself or that I feel ashamed. I just like, I don't know. And like, if I was to feel pride, it would never be about something that I haven't chosen, like my queerness. Like it would be, what's far more important to me is to be like a good friend to people, you know?
Do you, just to quickly ask, do you feel that pride puts an unnecessary expectation in that in order for us to be validated and okay with ourselves, that we must walk through life with some sort of sense of pride?
Well, I definitely feel that in sex work when people kind of want you. I mean, I think I've said before, and I'll just steal what I've said before because it's easier than rephrasing it, but people want, like, with sex work, they want like empowerment to be a prerequisite for rights. And it's like, no, we need rights so we can have empowerment. So I definitely do get that, like with sex work, people are always wanting you to say that like you really love your job and like things like that. But I also just think, oh God, I lost my train of thought. In regards to, I just think there are things in life that are what I was going to say was in regards to other people's opinions and what they think of me, I actually don't really give a fuck about what people generally think of me. Like all I care about is having the respect of people I respect. So like I completely mute out just all the randoms opinions of my queerness or my sex work or anything like that, because it's my community that matters to me. And my community for me is like made up of friends, you know, it's made up of queer people, it's made up of sex workers, whatever. And it's like, if I treat them well and they feel that I treat them well, and I know that they will tell me if they feel like I'm not behaving in a good way, or if I'm not speaking about something in an appropriate way or whatever, if I'm accountable to my community, that's what matters to me. Like, I don't really care about the pride stuff. Like, yeah.
Would you say that your chosen family, I guess, is your happy place, and the place that you feel comfortable, and I guess what some would conceive to be pride within yourself?
No, I think my happy place is probably being stoned with my cat.
I mean, your cat's your people, yeah.
yeah. But no, I do love my community, but no, I don't necessarily think they're my happy place.
I just wanted to pick up on that sort of like I don't give a fuck attitude. Like, I think the older I've got, the more eccentric I have been about how I express myself in whether that's my gender expression or my clothes or the colours I choose to wear. And the more eccentric I've got, the more I don't give a fuck. And so, yeah, I feel like sometimes being like hyper visible is a way of being able to, you know, it's almost like, I'm going to dazzle you with colors. And that's my like defense mechanism.
I'm sort of the same, except to me, instead of trying to dazzle people, I really thrive on disgusting people. I'm really in my happy place when I've either very obviously made someone reconsider their sexuality, or when I've like completely ruined someone's day. Like, that's my like little happy place. God, I'm such a bitter old lady, but it's absolutely my happy place. Like, that's, you know, because that's the thing, right? It's like, I'm not proud, like, because it's not like I don't have a choice in it. Like Tilly was saying, I don't have a choice in this stuff. But when I'm most in my power is when people are so affected by like literally just my physical presence, not even opening my mouth. They're so affected just by like how I am and what I am, that they have to have some kind of like visceral response. And to me, that's when I'm in my power. Sure, sometimes that winds me up in like, I don't know, getting bottled on a main street in Adelaide or whatever. But like also sometimes it, I don't know, it liberates people or it ruins their day, and maybe they deserve to have their day ruined a little bit.
I want to exist without the colonial gaze. And I don't think I'll ever experience that in my life. And I also don't want to be seen. I just want to exist. Because as an Aboriginal person, sometimes being seen is life or death, you know, like it's being seen by forces like the police can mean death. And I know other community groups can resonate with that. So it's visibility is a tricky word, and I think it's just like, and that's why I resonate with, you know, I don't give a fuck. I just want to be like, after Trump, I've come to the resolve that there are just really fucking horrible people in the world. And not even after Trump, that was just a big reaffirming. There are horrible people in the world. There are always going to be horrible people. we're never going to live in a utopia. And so therefore I just want to be able to live my life without having it being interrupted by those horrible people. And I'm not going to interrupt theirs. They can exist over there, but I want to exist over here and do my thing. That's what I want. Also, I see that Amira, my friend, asked a quick question about what's your favorite song to have sex to. I don't like listening to music when I have sex, Amira.
I was actually gonna finish on that.
Everyone always thinks I'm weird for that. I hate listening to music when I have sex, especially because at brothels, music plays constantly. So it reminds me of work. I'm like, and the worst music plays at brothels is always like Frozen, Let It Go while you're like having sex with a client. You're like, this is
no.
Yeah, it's so bad. So yeah, no music. I'm like, I also am having sex with someone so I can hear the noises they're making. Like, I don't want to be distracted. Like
well, that was the question I was going to finish on to end on a light note. So thanks for bringing that in, Tom. Does anyone anyone want to share their little sexy music playlist? SEXtember does have, if anyone is curious, there is four SEXtember playlists that you can listen to. One of them was playing at the beginning of this session. Does anyone have any recommendations of where to start? No?
I'm still stuck on Frozen. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm a little. That will never leave my mind.
My first time having sex to music was my first time having music was to death metal, so you probably don't want that. Like no one wants that.
There is a dungeon in Sydney, and the mistress curates like seasonal BDSM playlists, which is quite good. I'm a playlist person personally, so yeah, that we'll end on that, guys. So I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight, and thank you to the people who submitted questions. If anyone does have any further questions and they'd like to submit anything, you can put it in through the chat now, and we will get our panelists to answer them in your own time. We've also got a little poll as well, just to rate your experience. And once again, I just really want to thank our panelists for coming out tonight. It was really great. As my partner said in the chat, it's great feeling like we're at a little queer party discussing life and whatnot, since we're really missing it. And I just hope that everyone that came tonight is safe and well. And I wish you all a really great night. And thank you.
Thank you for organising it all, by the way.
Thank you, Chantal.
Absolute
Thank
joy.
you very much. That was wonderful.
Thank you.